Oh, this is taking forever. I'm still here. I'm still here. Oh, these pages just take so long to load. They're trying to kill me. Ding. No, that is not what we want. Oh, mercy. And there we go. We are live. We are alive. We are live and presumably, we hope, well. And let's see who's out there. Jeremy. Tap. I have tapped. Dirk. Olaf. Hi, Olaf. I miss you, buddy. Ilva. Hello, sweetie. This is not actually a jacket. I'll show you in a minute. It's a bowling shirt. I'm just wearing it over a t-shirt tonight. Ronnie. Hello. Kenneth. Hello. Svan. Hello. Who else is out there? Chris. Hi, Chris. Hello, Holger. Hello, Cliff. Wouter. Hello. And Rosalba. And Carol. Lovely to see you all. Yes, good. Thank you for the pronunciation update. Because I don't know where in the world people are sometimes, I sometimes have to just guess on pronunciations, on names. If I can't immediately recognize what part of the world and how it's likely to be pronounced, I'm guessing, because sometimes you get a name like Carol in America and England, but it's Carl or some variant Carol in some other countries. And well, anyway, you know what I'm talking about. It don't matter. So thank you. Thank you for letting me know. I always appreciate it. And hi, it is about 2 minutes after 2 in the morning here in California. For a moment there, it felt like my old radio days. Yeah, it's 2 o'clock in the morning and we're listening to the mellow sounds. No, we're not listening to the mellow sounds. I am by no means mellow, and especially when I'm trying to do like 7 different kinds of accents without practicing any of them and without necessarily even knowing they're coming up. I don't know, you guys, those of you who have nothing better to do with your time right now than watch me, you have my sympathies. You're welcome to watch me as I'm reading the book, because every now and then you'll see me and my eyes are like flicking to the side because I'm skipping ahead going, oh crap, there's a new character coming. Who is it? How are they supposed to talk? I literally have no idea. And then of course I'm, doing accents. I might be I mean, I have a background in theater, so I can learn accents and do pretty good ones. But very seldom on the spur of the moment, then you fall back into bad imitation dialects and stuff like that. So you just have to bear with me. I apologize to everybody whom I'm offending by mangling their dialects. Anyway, so what else is going on? All right, so we've had Christmas and we've had New Year. New Year, not surprisingly, was a very quiet affair for us. As a matter of fact, I hardly saw anybody in the household at midnight. I think I saw a couple out in the living room. Deb had long since gone to sleep. Deb gets up early in the morning and crashes out early in the evening. She may even have gone extra early on New Year's Eve. She does sometimes. But I literally cannot remember the last time that Deb was up when the clock hit midnight and it became the new year. And part of that is just because we don't go to that many parties, and especially now, obviously, we're not going to New Year's parties. So it's pretty entertaining what passes for New Year's at our house. At least in days past, we occasionally would sort of all gather in the living room at about 4 minutes till and throw the television on and see, whichever countdown they were doing, London or New York or something. And it already happened somewhere, and then 12 o'clock would come and we all go, Happy New Year. And Devin or Connor or both of them would always do their every single year thing, which is to fall down on the floor. This happened again this year, even. Devin was there. They fall down on the floor. They go, I'm so hungry. And you're supposed to say, what's wrong? And then they can say, I haven't eaten since last year. So that was, so we did reenact that part of the family tradition. But other than that, it was the most boring New Year's you've ever seen. I think most people in the world, I'm sure some were out celebrating, but as I said in an online post the other day, everybody is so busy saying 2021 has to be better than 2020, that the possible piling up of the cosmic jinx of saying that, that worries me. So let's just pretend. Let's just pretend that 2020 was normal and 2021 is, could be normal, could be not, who knows, whatever. And just play it by ear. And somehow we will all manage. Anyway, so what else am I thinking about that I wanted to share with you guys? Not much, really. As I said, we're just pandemic. We are locked down. We are, having the occasional moments of panic that everybody has, where you suddenly realize you don't have some crucial household product. I do not mean to suggest that in any way, shape, or form we are suffering or whatever, because a lot of people can't even afford food. So the last thing I would do is try to suggest that our suffering is comparable in any way, shape, or form to real suffering. It's more just kind of that geez, we haven't had paper towels for half a year. We've ruined every regular towel in the house or whatever. We have no coffee. What'll we do? So all that kind of stuff. But other than that, we're just hunkered down. I know I was working on a Christmas story and I told you guys about that. I didn't get it finished early enough before Christmas to read to you guys, so I'm still deciding what to do with it. It's still got a little bit of alteration that needs to be done. So I'm trying to think of some way to make it available before next Christmas. So we may send it out to people on the mailing list when I finish it. But I'm also juggling other projects. I'm going back to my short novel, which is the next thing in the queue. And once I finish that up in a couple of weeks, I'll probably go back to The Navigator's Children, which is the final part of the current monstrosity, the current Monstro trilogy. Anyway, so any other stuff? Deb is knitting and doing a really marvelous job, making some beautiful sweaters, which she's starting to get confident enough now that she may want to put some of those up for sale. And the colors are just gorgeous. So I suggest those of you interested in those kinds of activities, knitting and art knitting, might want to keep an eye on Deb's Facebook pages and Twitter feed, because Deb obviously is on, except for my readings, Deb is on more than I am, and she has lots to say and lots of cool things to share. So if you aren't already checking out, she's Mrs. Tad on Twitter, which I think she did just to make it look like I tried to get her to do that. Why don't you call it Mrs. Tad? Like as if I ever would. She also used to say, I really wanted to take your last name, but I just couldn't give up my family's. And I'm like, I never asked you. I wouldn't ask anybody. I don't care. I had a different last name than my parents, for God's sakes, so, I mean, what do I care? But anyway, so she's Mrs. Tad on Twitter, and I think she's just Deborah Beale on Facebook. So you can find her pretty easily, and she's always got interesting things to share, and Deb's inimitable personality. And so that's well worth it. I haven't been online much. I've had a lot of pressing work and stuff, so that's what's going on with that. I apologize for all the unanswered messages and other things. It's just sometimes beyond me trying to keep up with my own life and get work done, and then also be, a dad and a husband and a pet provider for. Pet provider for? No, that's terrible. Anyway, that is preposition hell. Anything else of interest? Not really. It's just been I don't want to say boring, because it's never boring around here, but it's been a less unusual week than most. We're usually, at other times of the year, we're out in the backyard discovering interesting new bugs or things. Deb did find some really cool fungi that we had never seen before out in the yard, which look like candy corn. They're really weird and interesting. But what some of you may not know, of course, the first thing I said to Deb, those of you who know her will understand this. First thing I said is, and she actually said, they smell really good. It says in the book they're edible. And I said, but you're not going to test that, are you? because back when we first moved into this house, my amazing wife, who stuns me sometimes, found a little sprig of what she thought was wild parsley in one of her planter pots, and took a little bit and tasted it. And then by later that night, she was feeling really bad. And then it just got worse and worse and worse. Well, what it turned out that it was hemlock. It was wild hemlock, the same stuff that killed that killed Socrates. And Deborah had eaten some of it, and eventually, we got her to go to the doctor, and, there wasn't much they could do at that point because it was like 48 hours after it had happened. So it was too late to pump her stomach or anything. So we had a couple of weeks. Fortunately, her mom was here staying with us at that point from England, Hazel, and we were able to kind of keep a good close eye on her. But she was really sick. And I mean, there were times when she was yellow or almost green. She was so pale. And, she's having all these internal problems of pain and things not working right. And it was horrifying. Eventually, she got better. And apparently there were no permanent damages. But so anytime Deb comes up with something new that she's found in the yard, the first thing I always say to her is, but you're not going to taste it, right? So anyway, so we found some new kind of cool funguses, which I've forgotten the name of now, but Deb's probably posted them on her page by now, so you can go check. And anyway, so before I start reading, hello, Holger, Suzanne, Steve, yo, dude, hola, ¿qué pasa, amigo? And Chris, did I say hello, Chris, already? Hello, Sonia. Hello, Christine. And Dave and Angela. But Wouter wants to know, but are they edible or not? Tell you what, Wouter, you come over to our house, and then it's up to you. But I would prefer my wife to not make any more experiments in wild horticulture. Oh, my Lord, that was horrifying. The doctor was, Deb, every time she called him, she would kind of go, hi, Dr. So-and-so, this is Deborah, I'm the one who, and I'm going like, I doubt this guy has ever dealt with a hemlock poisoning in his entire life. You probably don't have to keep reintroducing yourself to him. It's like, yeah, hi, I'm Deborah. I'm the one who was gored by an antelope. It's not really something you forget easily, even if you're a busy doctor. Okay, so back to the book. So we have just spent a segment before this in a club where Cumber, who is Lady Daffodil's helper in the science department of Jonquil House, or whatever it's called. And Cumber and Applecore and Theo have gone out with with Lady Jonquil's son, as I recall, and had a kind of frightening time because, among other things, Cumber got really drunk and started denouncing all these rich fairies because he's a poor boy, and has had to have his wings taken off so he could go into service, and he has a bit of a breakdown. So they finally get him out of there, and they're on their way home. Then we have a section with Poppy Thornapple, who you'll remember that Theo met on the train, and then drove to the city with. And she has just come back from a night at the same club where she actually saw Theo, and they had a brief conversation. And she was there with another rich young fairy named Melander Foxglove. Again, this is the Foxglove, Thornapple, and Hellebore families are all linked, and they're all basically enemies of Theo's people and friends. Anyway, so there she is, and Melander is, kind of getting romantic, and she basically doesn't want anything to do with him because she's all in a turmoil, and that's where we stop. So I will just go back a paragraph or so and start reading. So here we are in chapter 21, and they are in Thornapple House, Poppy's family residence. "Leave me alone, Melander," she said, and turned and walked across the dark entry hall. But he would not leave her alone. She heard his footsteps behind her. Ah, so we want to be chased, do we? She could call the guards. One word, even one strong thought, and the hob would have half a dozen brawny creatures down on him in seconds. She wasn't some servant girl to be trifled with, even if he was the son of one of the leading families. She was a thorn-apple. Her father was first counselor. But if he didn't go quietly, if there was a ruckus and a public scene, Daddy would be so tiresome about it. She reached deep into her memory for a charm. It was something she hadn't used in years, since the days of sneaking out of the residence hall with Calpurnia and Julia, the Woodbine sisters, and coming back late to find Miss Stonecrop waiting for them, old Stony so angry her spectacles were fogged. Poppy whispered the words under her breath, felt for the thought in the way her tutors had showed her. It was a wriggling thing, small, shiny, and hard to grasp as a fish in muddy water, and caught it. Poppy! Iron and blood! Where did you go, Poppy? Suppressing a giggle which would give her away to Melander Foxglove's sharp senses no matter what the charm did, she turned and went right past his outstretched hand, retaining the memory of his stunned, irritated face in the glow of the elemental light, to enjoy later. He was sharp, though. He felt the faint breeze of her passage and lunged at her, but missed. She hurried toward the stairwell. She would take an elevator from the next floor up. The irritating thing about elevators, she told herself as she trudged onto what by her count must be the 25th floor landing, was that they didn't work during power blackouts. These more and more frequent outages were becoming very annoying, and this one was certainly inconvenient. She could muster enough force on her own to run one or two small appliances. She might not have applied herself much during her tutoring, but she had natural ability. However, the elevators were all slaved onto one main circuit. To make one work, she'd have to be able to make them all work. And even her father, with all his years and experience, didn't have the power to do that on his own. We've made ourselves prisoners in our own houses, she thought, although she had to admit that might be a touch overdramatic. I am attempting to engage auxiliary energies, the hob said into her ear, and into the ear of everyone else in the building. I will return the house to normal as soon as possible. Poppy had passed a few servants and family functionaries on the stairs, some of them groping blindly, some of them carrying their own little lights they had made. If she had not been used to the deference of underlings, she might have thought it strange that they did not look at her, and even more so that many of them almost bumped into her and did not stop even to sketch a bow or a quick curtsy. But climbing more than 24 floors at the end of a long, confusing, and ultimately rather dreadful night made her less observant than she might have been, and she had also underestimated the strength of her own conjuring. It did not occur to her that they could not see her or sense her at all, that the charm was still in place. Even without the inarguable darkness, she would have known the power in the building was off by the effortless way the door swung open at the lightest push. The entrances to the family's private section of the Thorn-Apple Tower were all so crisscrossed with charms that ordinarily a large coach would have bounced off it. Excuse me. The entrances to the family's private section of the Thorn-Apple Tower were also crisscrossed with charms that ordinarily a large coach would have bounced off it, should such a thing be found in the 25th floor lobby in the first place. But now, and without her even having to breathe her own secret house name, it opened for her like a lover's arms. In the green flicker of the emergency witch lights, she could see the corridor stretch before her, but little else. Something was strange, but of course everything was strange in a blackout, and she was still thinking about the door. No, we're not just prisoners. We're slaves to our own assumptions, because with the power off, anyone could just walk in here and do anything. The arrogance of our strength, she thought. Not even a bolt on the door. It was only when she was halfway down the corridor and the startlingly tall figure of Lord Hellebore stepped out in front of her, glowing with witchlight of his own manufacturing, that she understood her mistake. She was on the office floor, not the residence. She swallowed a squeak of surprise at seeing him, dark-haired and glowering, his skin corpse-like in the nimbus of sickly fire, and then had to suppress another gasp when he walked past her. "I'm still wearing the charm." He stopped and hesitated, thin face lifted as though he scented something, and she knew she should speak up. It was rude to be invisible, even in your own house. But something in his hard face choked off the admission as thoroughly as a hand around her throat. Nidris Hellebore shook his head once, not so much a movement of confusion as a refocusing of feral attentions, then strode to the window at the end of the passageway. As he turned and came back, Poppy shrank against the wall and held her breath, although she still couldn't have quite said why. Even if he caught her, the worst that could happen was a scolding, certainly. She was in her own house. She hadn't done it on purpose. "What is it?" Now Lord Foxglove, Lander's father, had come out into the corridor. "Are we attacked?" The contempt in Hellebore's voice was quite impressive. "If so, then someone has attacked a third of the city. No, you bloody fool, it's another power breakdown." Foxglove's own halo of witchlight shrank a little, as though he had been slapped. "It's just the matter we're talking about. It makes me..." "If you're going to say it makes you act like a coward, don't bother. I've noticed." Hellebore stopped again, turning his head from side to side. "But it does feel like there's been someone here, and not too long ago." Foxglove did not appear to be listening. "It's just I don't think. There must be another way." "What are you two doing out there?" called another voice, Poppy's father. "Come in here and close the door. The hob will sort it out." "On our way, Owlus," Hellebore said it in a loud, cheerful voice. An instant later he turned back to Lord Foxglove, like a viper. "You are a bloody fool," he said, just loud enough for Poppy to hear, a few feet away. "I should have brought in Monkshood instead of you. He may be mad, but at least he has some grit. Who needs your ridiculous coextensive faction anyway? It will all be meaningless soon. Look, out there! Miles of black. No power. It's all coming apart, and you know very well it's not going to get better. The question is, are you with us or not? This is the time for great decisions and, yes, taking risks. Even more important, we've risked everything, Thornapple and I. If you think you can just back out now, well, I'm sure you remember what happened to Violet." "But I just... Is there no other way?" "If you think that, you're living in a magical world, Foxglove. You might as well be a mortal and go fly to the moon. I asked, do you remember what happened to Violet?" "Of course. And think about Violet House. Think about the empty lot in the middle of Eventide where it used to be. Black burnt trees. The ground sown with salt. But just think about it from time to time. Now come, our host is waiting." Hellebore took Foxglove's arm. For a moment, their halos of light blended, shimmered. Then they went through the door into her father's office, and the corridor was dark again. "I am attempting to engage auxiliary energies," said the hob, and this time, with her nerves pulled tight as lute strings, Poppy did indeed let out a little squeak of surprise. "I will return the house to normal as soon as possible." She hurried back toward the stairwell, hoping now that the charm would last long enough to get her onto the right floor, past the servants, and into her bed. She didn't care if it was in the dark. She just wanted to be able to pull up the covers and make the world go away for a while. "It's none of my business," she told herself. "Whatever they're doing, it's none of my business. I hate this house." Chapter 22. Status Quo Ante. It was not easy to fall asleep after an evening like that, but he managed at last. He probably would have been better off staying awake. The old, familiar bad dream came back for the first time since he left his own world, although in truth he had felt its presence all evening, from his first view of the bony, angular heights of Hellebore House. In many ways, the dream seemed the same as before. Theo imprisoned in his own body, sharing it with an alien presence. As with the other nightmares, he stared out through a surrounding murk, but in this version it wasn't mist that encircled him, but smoke. He was looking down from the top of a tall building, the stars hugely bright and close, the air sour with the smell of burning. The city below him looked like a lava field, with dozens of patches of bright red glow, each signifying an entire neighborhood in flames, providing the only light in the dark city. Screams drifted up to his high perch, as thin with distance as the mewing of kittens. But what was worse than the suffering going on below him was that he could feel himself enjoying it, savoring the terror that ran wild in the shadowy streets. The alien presence was completely in control. Every shriek gave him a jolt of pleasure. It was like sex. It was better than sex because he, or rather the thing that wore his body like a suit of clothing, was having his way with an entire world. Theo woke up, sweating and whimpering, and was helplessly grateful to find himself in his room in Daffodil House. That's right, Daffodil House, not Jonquil House. He asked for the time, and the hob voice told him in a desultory way that it was after midnight. Fairies didn't seem very specific about time, he had learned, and their houses followed that pattern. He knew he was not going to be falling asleep again any time soon, not while his heart was still rattling in his chest. He asked to have the lights on, then went into the bathroom and got himself a glass of water, marveling anew at how bizarrely ordinary a place this could seem, as though he were spending the night in a decent but not overwhelming hotel, instead of in the heart of a magical fairyland. The tap turned, the water came out. Experimentally, he flushed the toilet. The water went around and around, not even backward the way some people claimed it did in Australia. He could only be thankful it didn't have a little paper strip across it reading, "Sanitized for your protection." Mints on the pillow would be okay, though. There was no use trying to jolly himself, no matter how apparently ordinary the setting. He was stuck in a very strange place. People, no, not even people, things were trying to kill him. He didn't know the rules. His only friend was the size of a ballpoint pen. He pulled Uncle Eamon's book out of his jacket pocket. Both leather jacket and notebook were looking a little the worse for wear, wrinkled from being sat on, a bit water-stained in places. He had felt sure that the book was the reason he had been dragged out of his own world, but so far no one had asked to see it or even asked him about it, even though he had mentioned it to Lady Amelia and Cumber Sedge, just to name two people here in Daffodil House. Theo still had no real idea of how things worked here, and he was wondering if a rereading of the notebook might help. There were things in it that he'd barely paid attention to at the time because he'd thought it was fiction. Because who could have ever imagined it wasn't? It's like someone gave me a manual on lion taming to read, but didn't warn me I was about to be smeared with gravy and parachuted into the African veldt. But the frustrating thing was that it wasn't an instruction book. There was no handy dictionary, no index of facts or explanation of local etiquette. It was a story written by a visitor, the areas of detail apparently arbitrary and maddeningly inconsistent. Theo began browsing through the notebook, skipping the early autobiographical sections entirely. He wasn't even certain what he was looking for, but in the few short days since he'd crossed over or passed through, or whatever the hell you called it, he'd become steadily less certain he knew what was going on. Strange as it had been, the Larkspur family forest, where he had first arrived, had at least felt something like what he would have expected fairyland to be. Now it was clear that it had been no more than a private game preserve, the grounds of a rich man's stately home. The real fairyland was here, in this vast city, or at least it seemed to contain most of Fairy's residents. At the same time, the weird modernity seemed to carry over into other areas as well. Class struggle, the power of wealth, the importance of technology. A word dimly remembered from high school social studies caught his eye, and he stopped to read. Although present-day Fairy is an oligarchy, and there have always been powerful families, as far as I can tell, some kind of shift happened about 200 years ago, their time. I cannot be exact because time in Fairy is a slippery thing, and comparing it to our own world makes it even more so. Fairy was once a true monarchy, ruled, as mortals themselves have described in poetry and folktale, by a king and queen. Shakespeare called them Oberon and Titania, but they have many other names, like Gwyn ap Nudd and Maeve or Mab. In fact, they seem to have many names and no names, because they were the only king and queen, and had been so for most of the memory of the fairy race, just as what I name New Erewhon was called simply the city by all in Fairy, since there were no other cities, only towns and villages. In any case, during the time of the last Gigantine War, a war between the fairy folk of New Erewhon and the race of giants whose origins and habitat no one can explain better than that they come from, quote, the giant country, something happened to the king and queen. They are commonly held to have been literally killed by the giants, but I have heard other explanations that suggest the king and queen died, exerting some great and final force that saved the city and defeated those terrible enemies. There is a song of armored giants approaching the heart of Fairy, burning and smashing all before them, that makes them sound more fearsome than even the most modern war machines of my own world. Whatever the case, the monarchs of Fairyland fell during the last struggle in the ruins of their stronghold, which for some reason seems to have been called by a name that translates as the cathedral, instead of the palace or anything else you might expect. And the reins of power were afterward taken up by what are commonly called the Seven Families, 7 of the most powerful clans who, either heroically or opportunistically, depending on how much cynicism is applied to history, created a power structure to hold Fairy together in the vacuum that followed the death of the king and queen. All of the famous 7 families, the daffodils, hollyhocks, primroses, hellebores, thorn-apples, violets, and lilies, were already among the land's most powerful families. Each had the normal clannish proclivities found among the high houses. The hellebores and daffodils fascinated by science, although in very different ways, the violets and lilies skilled in the creative arts, thorn-apples drawn to business, and the hollyhocks and primroses engaged by politics. One trait they all shared, though, was a desire to rule over Fairy. After the initial panic was over and order restored, they were forced by popular will to reinstate the Parliament of Blooms, but real power remained, and still remains, with these clans and their closest allies. Then the lights went out. For a moment, Theo felt certain something really bad had happened, that someone had discovered he was reading something he shouldn't, and now they were coming to get him. But then he remembered the blackout in Tansy's house, and various comments he'd heard about Fairy's untrustworthy power situation. When the Hob voice proclaimed that alternative power operations would begin soon, and that the proper authorities had all been contacted, he could not entirely forget he was trapped in pitch blackness in a very strange house in a place full of ogres and worse things, but he felt at least a bit reassured. Thus, when someone suddenly knocked at the door, he let out only a very small scream of surprise. "Ah, who is it?" "Cumber Sedge to see you," explained the hob, persisting in its duties even in the middle of a blackout. "Me, Cumber," said the person in question. The Farisher had brought his own light, a sphere the size of a large marble, which gave off enough radiance to illuminate the young fairy's mournful face, but not much more. "Sorry to bother you. I'm Master Vilmos. The hob said your light was on. Well, until all the lights went out. Uh, Call me Theo, please. Come on in. How are you feeling?" "You mean from the drinking?" "Not bad. It'll be worse when I wake up tomorrow. Good thing it's Mabon, and Lady Amelia isn't expecting me to work. But about how I behaved? Pretty wretched, to tell you the truth." He followed Theo into the room and, perhaps in some kind of penance, declined a chair and sat cross-legged on the carpet. It happens. Everybody has to let loose sometimes." Theo hesitated. "Unless they're going to execute you for it or something." "Nobody goes to the well for saying things like that," Cumber said. At least not unless they're a goblin." "Well, that's good. Not for goblins, I guess, but I'm glad they're not going to have you shot for insulting a flower or something." The Farisher nodded. Even in the thin glow of the magic marble, or whatever it was, he looked profoundly unhappy. Theo had thought of the long-faced Cumber Sedge as about grad student age, but he realized now the butterscotch-colored fairy was probably at least 5 times that, 10 times, for all Theo knew. He sipped his water and waited for the other to say something. It was a long wait. "So, does this happen all the time?" Theo asked at last. "This blackout thing?" Cumber shrugged. "It's been getting worse. All the power plants are strained. Lord Daffodil has 3 of them in Ivy, and I hear they're all having problems. That's one of the reasons for the big meeting they're having." "Oh, yeah?" Theo wondered what had brought the young fairy to his room. Cumber seemed to have something on his mind, but perhaps he just wanted the company of someone who didn't think he was a disgrace and embarrassment. "Interesting. What big meeting is that?" Cumber looked stricken. "You haven't heard? Why hasn't anyone told you?" "Told me what? Why should they bother to tell me?" "Because you're one of the reasons for the meeting." I'm... Hang on, what?" "Lady Amelia was talking about it yesterday. Lord Daffodil knows that some of the other houses were trying to get hold of you, and since you're staying here, he figures he has a bit of a bargaining chip." "Bargaining chip?" Theo felt a sudden chill. "You mean they're going to make some deal? Hand me over to those people who are after me?" No, Cumber said hurriedly. "No, I can't imagine that. Lady Amelia's way too interested in you, for one thing. But Lord Daffodil knows the hellebores and thornapples and that lot want you, so apparently he's decided he's going to make them worry a little, wondering what secrets you're telling him. Oh, which reminds me, I've been kicking myself for letting Xyrus drag us out tonight, especially onto hellebore family turf. It was madness. Your friend Applecore's wrong, though. The people in charge here do care what happens to you, at least as long as you're valuable to them. And if something had gone wrong while we were outside the compound, they probably would have blamed me." He had the look of someone who'd eaten something that was not agreeing with him. "Hold on," Theo thought. "Thornapples? Poppy's family? They're after me too? Could she have known that? I don't get this, any of it. These bad guys think I'm telling secrets to Daffodil or something? What secrets? I don't know anything. Why are they all so interested in me? These people don't even like mortals. This is why I wanted to come talk to you, Master. Theo, I feel terrible that no one's telling you anything. Not that I know much, but I do know one important thing. Something that you need to know, too. Cumber took a deep breath. Can I get myself a glass of water? I feel like one of the great beasts is nesting in my mouth. Of course, be my guest. The bathroom and the tap were only a few steps away, but Theo didn't relax until the Farrisher had returned with his water and sat down on the floor again. In movies, someone who was about to explain something important always got shot in the back or stabbed or something just before they could tell you the astonishing truth. Well, Cumber said, first off, you're not immortal. You're one of us. What? Theo had to think for a moment to make sure he actually heard what he thought he'd heard. He was suddenly finding it hard to breathe. You're joking. You must be joking, right? Cumber said, shook his head. I don't know why they haven't told you, but I know it's true. I've seen the test results, the readings on your index of humors. Well, you're on the low end of normal, but you're certainly not mortal. No, it couldn't be anything else, and I heard Lady Amelia talking to her brother about it. Her brother? He was dazed. Lord Daffodil? She called him when the results first came in. But, he tried to find something he could use as a weapon against the enormity of the attack. I'm not human? That's bullshit. I had parents, for Christ's sake. Cumber flinched as if struck, but kept his eyes fixed on Theo, even through obvious discomfort. You had people who raised you, he said quietly. Mortal people. I'm sure they were very good to you, but that doesn't mean you're related to them. Changelings seldom recognize the truth on their own, and after a certain point in their lives, they are human. You probably wouldn't have passed our tests after you'd been there a few more years, not to mention all the other things that could have accelerated or even finished off the mortalization process. Having a family, undergoing a religious conversion, a serious illness. For a moment, the Farrisher's guilty gloom was brightened by discussing the subject of his expertise. There have been cases where changelings in the mortal world would have even denounced other changelings, without for a moment reflecting on why they were so certain. This was like one of those topsy-turvy dreams where someone could tell you things that you knew were wrong, yet you couldn't summon a useful argument against it. Hold on! Theo waved his hands. His own voice sounded distant, as if someone else was speaking. If I'm one of these fairies, then why are they so interested in me? Why, all the tests, they couldn't have needed all that just to tell whether I was one of them or not. Those reflex tests, the color recognizing stuff. As Lady Amelia said, she was telling you the truth about this anyway, Theo, they haven't seen anyone like you for a long time. There isn't much travel between your world and ours anymore. There aren't many changeling babies, and I haven't heard of any that have crossed back over to our side for ages. But I feel like a mortal, damn it. You probably do. That's how you were raised, but more importantly, you feel like you. When have you ever been anyone else to compare it to? He tried to think of a reply, but couldn't. This new dream, this nightmare, was defeating him. Did Applecore know about this? Not as far as I know. It only came up after Lady Amelia saw the test results. Anyway, your friend doesn't seem like the type who'd keep a mouth shut about something important. Theo had dozens more questions, but Cumber Sedge had very few answers. Tests could not show who his real parents were. The Farrisher knew of no famously missing children, not as far as he could tell, nor as far as he could tell did Lady Amelia. Theo's original identity was a mystery. Switching babies with mortals had been very common in the past, but was almost unheard of these days, largely because of the Clover effect. Theo felt like he wanted to cry. But at the same time, he felt like he was drifting in a vacuum, unable to touch or even to remember the normal life he had been leading until moments earlier. Even in the midst of such abnormal events as he had experienced lately, he had still felt himself to be a very ordinary person. That was gone now. He literally had no idea of who or what he was. He sat for a while in silence, full of anger and confusion. At last, he let out a deep, shuddering breath. Listen, I appreciate you telling me this and everything, and someday I'll probably thank you. But for now, could you get the hell out? I'd like to be on my own. Certainly. I understand. Cumber got to his feet, not entirely steady. I'm sorry, but I thought you should know. Right. He showed him to the door, tried to find something else to say as the Farrisher stood awkwardly in the hallway outside, but couldn't. It was only after he slammed the door that he realized he'd sent away the only light. He groped back to the bed and lay there in the dark, his mind a flurry of fragmentary images that did not ever quite coalesce into sense. His childhood, his mother's dying, the crazy things he had seen here, even Kat's angry, pale face. It went on for hours, or seemed to, a helpless roller coaster ride through seemingly unending confusion. What am I? Where did I come from? Is my whole life just a stupid, made-up story? A sudden ugly thought, alone in a lightless room in a strange land. Is this what that dream's about? That thing inside me looking out through my eyes? Maybe I've got some kind of evil fairy side, and now it's starting to come out. Mom said she couldn't love me the way she should have, he suddenly remembered. Because I didn't seem right. Wasn't that what she said? She knew. She knew. The power was still off when he finally fell asleep. A transition from one helpless darkness to another. Daffodil Combe was in a barn-like structure underneath the main tower, a vast room that resembled a high school gymnasium. The power had come back, but the overhead lights in the huge room were dim, and there were enough small flying people in the air to make details hard to discern, so Theo could only guess at the place's original purpose. Do these people even play sports? He wondered. Normal ones? It was depressing how little he knew about the world in which he was presently forced to live, and worse, how little he knew about these creatures who were apparently his own kind. He couldn't think about that just now, though. It was like his whole mind was an aching bruise, easier to concentrate on things that didn't matter. Poor, snobby Rufinus had said something about being on a fencing team. That was the reason he had thought himself capable of handling the Hollow Men. He had been horribly wrong, of course. So this world had fencing, but what else? It was hard to imagine fairies playing field hockey or football. In fact, the ruling class seemed more like an entire nation of country club tennis players. Much easier to picture them sipping drinks on the patio after a match, expensive sweaters draped across their shoulders, than getting into a sweaty half-court basketball game. Hey, giant feet, you want to watch where you're going? Shrilled a thickly accented voice. What is that, how you spend your days off, stravaiging about and crushing innocent people? Theo froze and looked down. The floor was as alive with traffic as the air above him. Tiny pixies and other small creatures filing in and out of the comb, scurrying across the floor to the propped outer doors of the room in long lines, like mice leaving Hamlin. Oh, sweet gee, he caught himself. Sorry, I didn't step on anyone, did I? No, but not because you're bloody graceful or anything. Theo carefully got down on his knees. The creature standing in front of him was a little larger than Applecore, but a uniform gray-green and covered with bristling spikes. Theo couldn't help thinking he looked like some kind of mascot for the Artichoke Council. He was carrying a toolbox. Oh my God, Theo suddenly thought. If Cumber's right, this guy's kind of a relative of mine. All these little bugs are. Closer to me than Mom, at least biologically. The thought was yet another in the category of too big and too strange. He simply couldn't do anything with it. Hey, I really am sorry, man. I'm new here. The spiky little person stared at him for a moment, then shrugged. Aye, it happens. Could you help me, maybe? I just need to find someone named Applecore, a sprite. Do you know her? No. Don't like 'em either. Bloody wingers. Think they rule the roost. Hang on. He put his two fingers, small as the points of sharpened pencils, to his mouth and whistled, surprisingly loud. Preet, preet, preet. Theo didn't know what he was supposed to say, so he didn't say anything. An instant later, another little person dropped out of the air from somewhere just above Theo's head. A male sprite, as far as he could tell, a handsome, graceful little fellow wearing a sort of toga. The winged man hovered, looking at Theo with only limited curiosity, then shouted down to the creature on the floor, What do you want, Thistlehead? I'm late to work. This big lummox is looking for one of yours and he almost stepped on me. Some flappy bint, height Applecore. Ring any chimes? The flying man ascended a couple of feet and examined Theo's face with some interest. I think she's staying in the guest quarters, he called down. Fine. You take care of him then. I have to go clean the silver tanks for the muckle storage battery, and I don't have time to waste on flutterby business. The spiky little man turned and stalked away, joining one of the lines of small creatures snaking toward the outer door. Friendly guy, Theo said. Those thorns aren't just for show, said the sprite, laughing. Hogboons are a grumbly lot, but he's all right as they go. I'll see if I can turn her up. You just stay here. Step on one of those little needle noses. You probably won't hurt him. They're tough as old leather. But you'll get a nasty prickle in your foot and no mistake. His wings blurred into invisibility, and he was off. Daffodil Combe had its own open-plan cafeteria, as Applecore had told him, in another large room just off what he now thought of as the gym. The smallest tables were the size of a silver dollar, but some were large enough to accommodate half a dozen diners, the size of a G.I. Joe doll. This was still a bit small for Theo, however, so he made his way carefully to one edge of the eating area so he could sit down on the floor with his back against the wall. Applecore perched on his knee with her tea and scone. At mid-morning, there weren't many other people in the cafeteria, but those who were seemed to find the spectacle of the sprite and her monstrous friend quite amusing. They giggled and whispered behind their hands. He felt like he was back in high school, except that even during the worst adolescent traumas of high school, he'd never had to worry about whether he was actually human. I don't know what to say, Theo. Truly. You didn't know. By the trees, I didn't. I swear. Could Cumber be lying? Or wrong? She took a sip, thinking. Anything's possible. But it doesn't seem likely. He's a good sort, that young fella, and he strikes me as a smart one, too. But I don't feel like one of these people. Besides, it doesn't explain any of this other crap, even if it's true. Do you think that's why those other people were after me? The ones who hired those cave trolls? Because they wanted to do experiments on me, like Lady Amelia did? Doesn't seem likely. Her little forehead furrowed. Fact is, boyo, this still doesn't make any sense. Just tell me one thing. What are you doing here? She frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Just what it sounds like. I've been wanting to ask you, but I was too scared. You're the only friend I've got here. He thought for a moment, tried to smile. To tell the truth, even back home, I've only got one other friend to speak of, So you're in some pretty select company. What would Johnny think of the news that Theo had fairy blood? He wouldn't believe it, of course, but he'd enjoy the chance to comment on the possibilities, that was for sure. Back at Tansy's house, you were going to let me go to the station, and that would have been that. Instead, you've come all the way here, risked your life. You can't even stay in your own home with your friends, all for someone you don't know that well and who's probably going to get his ass killed anyway. She glared as one of his self-pitying hand gestures almost knocked her off his knee. Sorry, but I don't get it. Even if it's not my fault, I'm into something deep. Why are you risking your life hanging around with me? She finished eating and brushed the crumbs off on his pants leg. That's not for the fancy accommodations, that's for sure. That scone was baked in a goblin sweatshop, or I'm not an apple. She stared at him for a moment. Why am I still here? I'm not entirely certain, and that's the truth. Part of it was, well, because when I first met you, I was surprised. See, I've never met a human before. But I'm not a human, apparently. It might as well be the way you interrupt. Root and bow, Theo. You're a pig sometime, and no mistake. She brought back the glare for a moment. He put his hand over his mouth. Better? See, I'd never met a human before, and I expected you to be, don't know, big and mean and stupid. I guess. Like a giant. But whatever else you are, you're not mean. Now it was his turn to glare. That's more like it, she said, grinning. It's true, but you may be a pain in the arse, but you're basically a good sort. Anyway, when I brought you through, you were so helpless. Oh, it just gets better and better. Be glad you have at least a few appealing qualities, boyo, however pathetic. Now pay attention. I didn't feel good about what was going on from the first. The whole thing about bringing you here. See, it was my job to get you through that gateway no matter what. That ugly dead thing showing up just meant I didn't have to argue with you or trick you. So it was a hard decision to let you go off to the city on your own, but to tell you the truth, you were a rude little shite with Dolly, and that made it easier. Then everything went to buggery at the station. So that's why you're here? Because I'm a loser and you felt sorry for me. If you want to think of it that way, Theo. Then I suppose so. Her voice had become surprisingly serious. Her face had become surprisingly serious. Good friendships have started with less. He remembered what he'd said to Dolly and found he didn't like that Theo very much either. Yeah, okay. You're right. Friendship is friendship, I guess. That wasn't all. She finished her tea, rolled off his knee, and buzzed over to put the little tray on the counter. A few moments later, she had settled again. See, I didn't entirely trust Count Tansy. I'm not saying he meant you any harm, just that I doubted he had your best interests at heart. One of my brothers used to be his errand runner and wound up in trouble because of it. Skin, the oldest. It's ancient history now, but because of it, my brother's only got one working wing. He's pretty much housebound. He does the family accounts and helped look after us little ones while we were growing. Tansy was playing some complicated political game and was using Skin to send messages. My brother got jumped by a gang of hard pixies and got a terrible beating. You probably think that sounds funny. No, I don't. I'm learning. And I've been through something like that myself once upon a time, but I was lucky enough to get away without being permanently damaged. That bad night out in the parking lot of that bar called the Stop Sign. It seemed like centuries ago now. But was what happened to your brother Tansy's fault? Not because he arranged it, but because he put Skinny in a bad situation without giving him the proper information. Then didn't seem too sad when it all went wrong and my brother got hurt bad. Sure, the Daisy Clan arranged a nice little pension for him, but Which do you think he'd rather have? Money or both his wings? Theo sighed. I'm trying to understand it all, but I keep coming back to this one huge thing I can't get past. Someone's telling me that I'm not human. I've been human all my life. How am I supposed to take that? You didn't know there was anything else but human to be all your life, Applecore said. Try to think of it like you'd just been told you weren't. Where was it you're from? America? That you weren't American, like you thought, but Frankish or something. French, he said absently. It was a good suggestion, but he wasn't quite ready for those kind of mental calisthenics yet. But I still don't get it. How could something like that happen? I wasn't adopted. My mother told me about when she went to the hospital to have me. She was upset because I arrived at a bad time and she didn't get solid food for 28 hours or something. Changelings aren't adopted. They're, what's the word? Substituted. Usually before the wee one is old enough to talk. At least that's how it used to be when it happened more often. Someone took your parents' real baby away. Or it died. Either way, there was an opening, and they were given you instead. Theo shook his head. So somewhere I must have fairy parents. Stands to reason? Can I find them? Although the idea was not entirely pleasant. He suddenly remembered a song he had written years earlier, a bluesy little piece of braggadocio about having a lightning storm for a father. Man, this is even weirder. I thought it was boring coming out of the middle-class suburbs. If I only knew. You could try, I suppose. But people here in Fairy, at least among your kind, if you'll excuse the expression, the larger folk, aren't all that interested in their families at the best of times. It's the way they are. You saw it with that Thornapple girl. Poppy. Whatever her name was. And let's be honest here, boyo. Leaving your child with mortals, probably never to see him again, that isn't exactly the act of a loving parent now, is it? You're saying they wouldn't be interested in meeting me. What's the kindest way to put it? No, I'm thinking, they would not. Especially if powerful people want to kill you. You're a bit of a mixed blessing even to those of us who like you. Theo Vilmos, a soft but steely voice said in his ear. Lady Daffodil commands your presence in the audience chamber. What's wrong? Applecore looked concerned. You didn't hear that? A voice just told me I'm supposed to go to the audience chamber and see Lord Daffodil. She pursed her lips and let out a near inaudible whistle. You're moving up in the world, fella. Do you know where it is? When he only shook his head, she said, Then I'll take you. Maybe see if I can stick around for the audience. Lord Daff doesn't show himself all that often. I'm glad that my miserable life is at least providing you with a few interesting moments. She chortled. Yeah, something new every minute with you, boyo. And that's where we're going to stop for tonight. But we're just about halfway through the book now, you see. So we're moving forward. We are moving forward. So I still have another few weeks before I have to start to think about what I'm going to do next. But I still haven't taken a week off, I don't think. Not yet. Not since whenever we started doing this, which I can't remember off the top of my head. March? April? Sometime back there. Anyway, and as usual, I am hugely... Suzanne's left a message here saying if Tad would move out of the way, we could see what the cat is doing. Yes, I'm sorry, which side is the cat on? The cat is on this side. Actually, no, but if I move this, you can probably see where the cat... Oh, no, now it's gone out of focus. You can probably see that little thing there. Hang on, let me figure out how to do this. That little spot is a cat. Right there. In a little cat nest. Anyway, now I've lost it. There it is. It's back again. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention there. I was saying that I was wearing a new shirt. This is not a new shirt. This one that says whatever it says. Frequently confused with my evil twin. But this is a Christmas present, and it's a very cool bowling shirt. And not only does it have my name on it, but I don't know if you can actually see this. I'll see if I can get down to where you can read it. But I can't see well enough to tell whether you can see it or not. If you can't read it, it says professional supervillain. Professional supervillain, which, that just delighted me. Quick story before I let you go for the night. When our son Connor was quite young, I don't remember how old, but like kindergarten, first grade, second grade, something like that. It's always been a joke in the family that partially because of the shaved head and partially because of my inherent evil nature, I've always talked about how I, being a professional supervillain and the things that I really want in life, is a giant lair in the shape of a skull with a volcano underneath it and neoprene-clad minions. And, of course, then when Austin Powers came along, I added sharks with frickin' lasers on their heads and all that stuff. And so it became kind of a running family joke. And Connor is very, very funny guy. And even when he was little, he was pretty funny. I think I've told you the church story. If not, I'll tell it another time. But anyway, so one day I was joking with Connor, and I was saying, because he was at that time in particular quite a quiet young kid, and I had said, honey, I need you to step up your game. If you're ever going to become, an evil genius supervillain like me. You gotta bring the big skills, and especially if you want the girls to notice you, because Connor had made it clear, even at a very young age, that he liked girls. And he said, "No, Dad, I don't need to be evil. I am going to appeal to girls with manners and math," which I thought was the sweetest thing I had ever heard. With manners and math, and that was his plan. Good kid. Okay, so with that, I am going to say good night. My brain is tired. Everything in me is tired. But it's always great fun to hang out with you guys. So next session is without Cat. No, without Tad. Only the cat, Holger says. Yeah, well, good luck with that. I can't even get her to leave her chair. You think she's going to come read to you? Anyway. Once again, thank you so much for joining me. It's always grand to make this connection. Be kind to yourself and those around you. Take care of your loved ones and neighbors and anybody you know that might need a helping hand. I will see you, those of you who can make it, I will be reading some hours from now at 7 p.m. my time, which kind of feels like tomorrow to me because this feels like Saturday night still, albeit very late Saturday night. But so if you can't join me then, I will be back again for the same time slot. And as always before, if you miss an episode and want to actually hear it, you can get it on tadwilliams.com, on YouTube, I think, on my Facebook page, my Twitter page, my author page on Facebook. So anyway, that is all available. If for some reason you are so masochistic as to need more Tad, which God knows my family doesn't want, so I don't know why anybody else would. But enough is enough. Good to see you all. Have a lovely night, a lovely morning, a lovely afternoon, wherever you are, whatever time it is. It don't matter because it's all relative. And I will see you very soon. So peace and love from Rancho B.O. Williams. And we will all be together again soon. Good night.